What if I told you the United States just launched something against Iran that does not feel like a single weapon at all? Not a missile, not a bomber, not a ship. Something bigger. Something that behaves like a machine built to find, pressure, and erase military options faster than Iran can rebuild them. That is the real story here. Because what Washington and CENTCOM have been running against Iran is not just a strike package. It is a campaign so large, so layered, and so relentless that it starts to look less like a normal military response and more like a system designed to make resistance feel obsolete. CENTCOM says Operation Epic Fury began on February 28, 2026, targeting Iranian command and control, air defenses, missile and drone launch sites, airfields, naval assets, and anti-ship missile sites. Later fact sheets said the campaign had generated thousands of combat flights and struck thousands of targets. And that is why the title matters. The U.S. military launched something that shouldn't exist. Sounds like clickbait, until you realize what Iran is actually facing. This is not just a few dramatic attacks and a press conference. This is a moving web of aircraft, surveillance, strike coordination, naval pressure, and target cycling that keeps hunting the parts of Iran's military that make its regional strategy dangerous. The goal, according to CENTCOM, is to dismantle the regime's security apparatus and hit locations that pose an imminent threat. That means every radar, runway, launch site, command node, and naval position that still matters has to live under the possibility that it has already been found. That is the first thing people miss. Iran does not just have to survive explosions. It has to survive the feeling that the sky is no longer neutral, the sea is no longer protective, and delay is no longer its friend. Because Iran's traditional advantage has never been raw, conventional dominance. It has been complexity. It has been depth, dispersal, hardened facilities, mobile launchers, drones, fast boats, missiles, and the constant ability to make any opponent calculate risk in 10 directions at once. But when the U.S. military launches a campaign built to compress those options into one giant survival problem, the whole equation changes. Here is the clean answer up front. What Iran cannot stop is not just one American platform. It is the tempo. It is the pace at which the United States and its partners can detect, strike, revisit, and pressure targets across domains. That is the monster in this story. Not one secret gadget, a kill chain with memory. And if that sounds dramatic, look at the scale being claimed. CENTCOM's March updates said thousands of targets had already been struck, with Iranian vessels damaged or destroyed in the triple digits and combat flights in the thousands. Even allowing for wartime messaging, that points to a sustained campaign, not a symbolic one. And recent reporting shows the conflict is still active and costly on both sides. AP reported today that a U.S. fighter jet was shot down over Iran and one crew member was rescued, underscoring how dangerous and ongoing the fight remains. That is what makes this more gripping than a normal America strikes Iran story. Iran is not facing one knockout punch. It is facing a system that keeps coming back. A radar goes down, another sensor picks up the gap. A launcher moves, surveillance follows the pattern. A ship hides, naval and air pressure tighten the box. A drone team fires, and in firing, reveals itself. The nightmare is not just destruction. It is exposure. And that matters even more in Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz remains one of the most important energy choke points in the world, carrying roughly a fifth of global oil and petroleum liquids consumption and a major share of LNG trade. Recent reporting has described the lane as severely disrupted by the war, with attacks on shipping and a push by U.S. and allied forces to reopen or secure movement. If Iran cannot hold pressure there without constantly revealing more of its own military tools, then its most powerful leverage starts becoming its biggest vulnerability. That is the second hard truth. Iran's military strategy works best when the threat is bigger than the battle. It wants you imagining missiles in tunnels, drones in reserve, boats in the dark, and launchers that could appear anywhere. It wants uncertainty to do half the work. But a sustained American campaign does the opposite. It tries to force Iran to spend those threats, reveal those positions, move those assets, and gamble with systems it cannot replace quickly. AP reported 3 days ago that despite heavy strikes, Iran remains a stubborn foe, still launching about 30 strikes daily and adapting its methods. That means the danger is real. But it also means Iran is burning through readiness in a conflict where the United States is trying to make every response costlier than the last. Now here comes the part that makes this script worth watching. The scariest thing the US may have launched is not a weapon the public can point to. It is a war rhythm. A tempo so aggressive that Iran has to live inside America's decision cycle instead of its own. That is what modern military dominance looks like when it is functioning properly. Not, we hit you once. More like, we keep collapsing the time you thought you had. Think about that from Tehran's side. A country that relies on layered defenses, hidden infrastructure, and asymmetric reach suddenly has to ask the same question every day. Which of our systems are still ours, and which ones are already being tracked? Which runways are still usable? Which launch teams are still alive? Which naval units can move without being watched? Which command nodes are still secure? That is not just military pressure. That is psychological suffocation. And before anybody turns this into a superhero movie, let's be honest. Iran is still dangerous. AP's reporting makes that clear. Iran continues to adapt, still launches missiles and drones, and still has enough surviving capability to threaten Israel, Gulf infrastructure, and shipping. Experts quoted by AP also warned that securing Iran's enriched uranium by force would be extremely risky and complex, involving hardened tunnels, toxic material, and potentially hundreds or thousands of troops. So no, this is not a clean, Iran is finished story. It is a story about one side trying to grind down the other side's options faster than they can regenerate. That is why this is dramatic. Not because the ending is obvious, because the machine is visible now. And you can see it in how the target set keeps expanding across categories. Command centers, air defense, ballistic missile sites, Navy ships, submarines, anti-ship missile sites, military communication capabilities. The point is not just to punish. The point is to disconnect. To make each surviving Iranian capability less useful because the systems around it have been damaged, degraded, or forced into hiding. That is how you turn a military into a collection of stressed fragments instead of a coordinated threat. Here is the concrete example. Imagine trying to launch a missile when your air defense picture is weaker, your communications are riskier, your launch site may already be observed, and the second you fire, you become a target. You can still do damage. Iran has proved that. But every shot begins to look more like a trade than a flex. That is a bad place to be in a long war. And that leads to the biggest mistake people make when they watch a campaign like this. They think military power is only about what blows up on camera. Wrong. The real power is what stops happening because the other side no longer trusts its own freedom to act. The radar that stays off, the boat that never leaves port, the launcher that never transmits, the commander who keeps moving instead of commanding. That invisible paralysis is where campaigns like this get their edge. So when people say, "What is the thing Iran can't stop?" my answer is this. It is the combination of reach, persistence, and integration. It is the fact that America is not just launching munitions, it is launching a process. a process that keeps updating the battlefield in real time and keeps turning Iranian choices into liabilities. And yes, there is a counterpoint. America can still lose aircraft. America can still face surprise attacks. America can still discover that destroying targets is easier than imposing a stable political outcome. AP's reporting today about a U.S. fighter jet being shot down is a reminder that even the stronger machine bleeds in a real war. This matters because hype dies fast when facts get complicated. But that does not cancel the larger point. If one side is absorbing losses while still cycling thousands of flights and sustaining pressure across multiple target classes, while the other side is forced to ration, adapt, hide, and reveal more of its remaining tools just to stay relevant, then the strategic weight is obvious. Iran may still be able to hurt people. It may still be able to shock markets. It may still be able to stretch the war. But stopping the system bearing down on it is a different question. That is the third takeaway. Iran does not need to be defenseless to be in trouble. It just needs to be less able, less hidden, and less coordinated tomorrow than it was yesterday. A campaign like Epic Fury is built for exactly that kind of degradation. Slow enough to be sustained, fast enough to feel relentless, broad enough to hit air, sea, missile, and command networks together. So what happens next? 3 paths. 1. The campaign keeps degrading Iranian launch capacity, naval pressure, and coordination enough that Tehran's threats become more sporadic and less credible. 2. Iran keeps enough surviving capability to make the war expensive, ugly, and politically difficult, even while losing ground militarily. 3. The conflict widens in ways that make tactical success feel less decisive because the region absorbs the shock through oil, shipping, infrastructure, and proxy escalation. AP's recent reporting points to that broader risk already, with attacks affecting Gulf infrastructure and Hormuz still under pressure. My base read is this. The thing that shouldn't exist is not fantasy technology. It is the scale of integrated pressure the U.S. can now apply when it commits fully. A campaign that turns the air into surveillance, the sea into a trap, and every Iranian move into a potential signature. Iran can resist it. Iran can wound it. Iran can survive parts of it. But stopping it cleanly is another matter. And that is why this story feels bigger than a headline. Because once the United States launches a campaign like this, the battlefield stops being a place and starts becoming a condition. A condition where Iran has to keep guessing what is seen, what is targetable, what is survivable, and what is already too late. That is not just military pressure. That is a nightmare with logistics. And for Tehran, the worst part may be this. The more it tries to prove it can still hurt the system, the more pieces of itself it has to reveal to a machine built to remember.